All right, so we've got the recording going and the AI Zoom IQ summary. So we'll see what that spits out at the end of this course. Like I said, if it's anything worthwhile, I'll post it into the chat for everyone to reference it in the future. So let's go ahead and kick off session one. It is 7:03 p.m. Central Time. This is night one of the Intro to Coding Live JavaScript. All right, so what is a programming language? It lets us write lines of code to give the computer a set of instructions to perform to produce some kind of output. Output is text to a screen, creation of a file, faxing, printing, emailing, all of those things. The computer will only perform exactly the instructions you have given it to perform, right? And this is very important. And this is a mental shift and how we need to start thinking about solving problems. The example I always throw out is making a cup of coffee or making a cup of tea, right? So like I just made myself a cup of green tea and I went outside, I grabbed the tea bag and opened it up, threw it in my cup, boiled some water, put the water in, all right? Like that's how a human does it, right? But a computer is, I need to open the drawer, identify the tea I want, pick up the tea box, open the tea box, pull the tea bag out, unwrap the tea bag, put the tea box back, run the water, grab the kettle, fill the kettle, plug the kettle in, wait until water's boiled, right? Pick up the kettle, pour hot water into the cup, let tea brew for 3 minutes, right? So like there are a lot more steps to doing things than what we realize as humans when we do things in the physical world, right? Like, oh, I need to drive somewhere. Well, I grab my keys and I drive somewhere. Well, there's a lot more to it than that. And when we start looking at programming computers, we have to identify all of the steps, right? And in the beginning, we're going to miss steps. We're going to tell it to do the wrong steps. And we're going to talk about ways to help manage that as new software developers as we move forward. Right. So first things first, we've got values. So every value is a piece of data or data type, and that data type determines how that value behaves. Right. So some values are numbers. The number 86, 2021. Some values are text. In JavaScript, we refer to text as a string. All right. So we see Chris here in the double quotes, and some values are functions. And there's lots of other things, excuse me, that can be values as well. All right. So any questions about values? Like I said, feel free to shout them out if you've got them, or just shoot it into the chat. I've got them pulled up and trying to keep an eye on everything. All right. So variables. So variables are named label identifiers for storing values. So these are some of the most basic building blocks right here that we're going to work with. So remember from math class, variables X and Y, well, those were placeholders for other numbers. So a variable in JavaScript is a placeholder for another piece of data or information. Right, so 3 ways to declare or create a variable in JavaScript. var, and we still talk about all 3 just because they're, with JavaScript being around for a while now, you will see basically like older examples when you're searching Google for how to solve problems. You'll see this in solutions. Var, it still works. You can still use it if you want to, but we don't recommend that you use it, right? You should be using let or const. So let is basically a variable that can be reassigned but not redeclared, and const can not be reassigned and is not accessible before they appear within the code, right? And don't worry if that all was just a bunch of garbled nonsense to you, because we're going to go in and talk about the difference between all 3 of these, and I will give you working examples of that. All right, so var const are reserved keywords in JavaScript. You can't use them for anything other than declaring variables. All right, and so everyone was asked to create a Replit account, and I've created a Replit for tonight, which is basically where we'll have all of our notes in here. At the end of the evening, as you can see, like when we scroll up from previous classes, I will post the video, any challenges that we did, and then the notes for the evening. All right. So all of that will be available, so you'll be able to see it and refer back to it. And let's see here. 1 second here, let me just make sure I haven't missed anything. See, I got a couple of messages. So let's see here. Sorry, 1 sec. I've got someone that is trying to get into class still. 1 sec. All right, so again, we'll have notes each night, and that'll be posted. And so I see we've got some questions in the chat. We'll finish up the slides for this section, and I'll swing back around and answer any questions anyone has. All right, so this is what a variable looks like, right? So there's var, let, and const, and we can break these down, right? So we talked about this is a reserved word. Anytime JavaScript sees var, let, or const, it knows it's expecting a variable name next, right? So this is the name of the variable, so we call it current year, and then this is the value. Remember back to our first section. So variables are how we store values and retrieve them again in the future, right? So var, right? And then if I do console.log, all right, so this is Replit. This is a virtual basically like IDE, so used to develop software. So you can kind of think of this as like a word processor, but it is a word processor tuned specifically to software development, right? Because I can open up a text editor, I can open up Microsoft Word, and I can write JavaScript in those if I want to. I do not recommend it, because you won't get any syntax linting, you won't get any color coding, you won't get all of the neat things that are built into an IDE in a word processor. But back in the day, so like in 1995, when freshman of high school, Charles was writing his HTML GeoCities website with his 2 megabytes of the internet universe, right? Like I was writing in a text document and saving it as HTML, and then uploading it via FTP to GeoCities, right? And then I had my sparkly GIFs and my Metallica MIDI sound file, and everything was awesome. All right. I use, as far as an IDE goes, I use VS Code, which is usually what I recommend to anyone getting started out, especially if you are going to Code Platoon, because they use VS Code and Code Platoon. You can technically use any IDE you want to, but your tech support with your IDE would be very limited because all of the instructors use VS Code there as well. Once you become a professional and you get paid, you can either stick with VS Code, or depending on the language that you use, there may be a JetBrains product for you. And it's a IDE stands for like interactive development, something or other. What does IDE integrated development environment. An integrated development environment is a software application that provides comprehensive facilities for software development. All right, and VS Code is a Microsoft product. It is free, and it is through using modular plugins, you can use it for pretty much any language you want to write with. There's a plugin to help you write that language more effectively. Usually on the last night of class, I will switch over to using Visual Studio Code just to show you what it looks like. I may pop into it for specific examples throughout class. Like when I show you the difference between, say, writing JavaScript and writing in the React framework and how those differ, even though they're both technically JavaScript. All right, so back to do this. So, I'm sorry, over here, right? And so now notice how, right, this is light blue, this is white, light blue, this is brown. If I delete this quote, like I get a red underline, right? Unterminated string literal, which means I'm missing my quote, right? There's all sorts of things going on here. It looks like it's giving me, I've got my AI box checked over here, maybe. I don't know. It didn't do this last time. They're always upgrading Replit. So there's more and more things happening here. But if I write this line of code and then I run it, it ran, nothing happened. All right, nothing came out over here. This is my console. To see things in my console, right? So notice how I type console and it's giving me help, right? Like it's saying, okay, well, it could be console, cross, origin isolated, but the console module provides a simple debugging console that is similar to the JavaScript console mechanism provided by web browsers. All right. And so this is what we call a built-in class. And when I put a period here, it is giving me different options, different built-in functions on this class that I can use. The hands down most used one here is log, right? So console.log, if I hold my mouse over it, like it'll give me a little bit about what's going on over here. It's giving me some predictive text saying name, right? And it's saying this doesn't mean anything because I've got a variable called name. Now when I run it, notice how I see Charles over here. And if I do this, I see this over here, right? So just because I write code doesn't mean I will see it over here in my console. And we're going to talk more about this. Like you will use this a lot in the very beginning or when you're doing challenges. But when I write software, I'm in a code base literally now with millions of lines of code in it. And there are no console.logs in it, right? Like we don't want information being sent to the console. We want information being logged into specific files, depending on what's going on. And we want information being sent to the UI, right? The user interface so that people can see it. All right, so this is var, right? And we can say let name. Right, and this will probably, I don't know if this will yell at me or not. Yep, so identifier name has already been declared. So you can only have a variable declared one time within a scope, right? And I'm out at the global scope right now. So this would have to be something different, right? So I could say name2, got that, and change this to name2. Right, and now I get John. And the other thing we can do, and this is what we talked about, where we kind of got into some word salad here, where the let is similar to const, the let variable can be reassigned but not redeclared. And const cannot be reassigned, is not accessible before they appear within the code. So what that meant is so var and let can be reassigned. So, but it cannot be redeclared. So I can't say let name2 again, right? See, I get my red error, so it cannot redeclare. But what I can do is I can reassign. So I can turn name2 from John and reassign it the value of Jeff. All right, so now when I get down here, I declared it as John, I reassigned it as Jeff, and then I said, print this out in the console. All right. And now lastly is const, which cannot be reassigned. So if I say let pet name equal nugget, right? And so now I can console.log pet name, which is one of my cats, is nugget, right? And I can see nugget over here, but just like I could reassign name to, because it's declared as a let, whoops, sorry, I was about to confuse myself here. This is a const. If I say pet name equals Nino, which is another one of my cats, right? I will now get an error, right? So assignment to constant variable. So, and this is important. This is the second one you've seen now, but this is an error. And the error is trying to help me out, right? So this is telling me assignment to constant variable. So maybe if I don't even know what that means yet, I can keep reading here and say, okay, it's in my file at line 9, position 9. All right, so it's telling me on line 9, right, at position like column 9. So right here, this is causing an error. And so always read your error messages when something isn't working the way you want it to. A lot of what writing code is working through error messages. I'll get an error message, I'll solve that error message, it'll give me the next error message, and then I go about solving that one. And that's how we solve these things step by step. All right, so let's go ahead and make a comment. And so a comment is 2 forward slashes, or if anyone's on a Mac, it is command /, or if you're on a PC, I believe it'll be either control / or Windows key /. All right, I'm on a Mac. So when I hit command /, it gives me a comment, and things that are commented out do not get read by the computer, right? So I don't get an error anymore, even though this is written here. Basically Replit shows it as green, so I can write notes to myself. I can comment code out if it's not working correctly. So I can say, if I uncomment my const assignment, it will throw an error, right? And so I'll leave that in there so you know why that's commented out. And there we go. All right, so we've got some questions here. So why didn't it produce a product when you entered the value? I think, again, that was because I wasn't console.logging it yet. You have to console.log it if you want to see it in the console. If you change the capitalization, it's also different. That is true, I believe, but also JavaScript follows specific capitalization requirements. So JavaScript is written in camel case, and I already just did it out of habit, but this is camel case, right? So we think about the humps in a camel. The first word is all lowercase. Each word in the variable name after that is going to be capitalized, right? So if I wanted to say my favorite pet name, right? So my favorite pet name, this just makes things easier to read. Like, it won't throw an error if you don't do it, but it's not correct JavaScript code, basically, right? Like, so one of my junior developers submitted something that looked like this. Before I would let them submit it and call the work done, I would make them correct this, right? Like, correct your typos. And because this, to me, is much harder to read than the camel case, which is why we use the camel case. The other very common one is the snake case. So Python uses snake case. All right, and that is where every word in the name of something is basically separated by an underscore. Right? And as you're cramming to learn 2 languages your first couple of weeks at Code Platoon, you will absolutely write tons of JavaScript and snake case, and you will write Python and camel case, and everything will blow up. All right. So let's see here. Why the spaces between each line? That's just for readability. That doesn't do anything. Like if I run it, it still goes. Clean that up, right? And when you write code, you won't put a space between each line, but usually you will separate your sections as you go, again, just for readability, especially like this is 9 lines, fairly light. You start getting into files with hundreds of lines of code in it, 50, 75 lines of code in it. It's all crammed together, then it can get more difficult to read. All right, and let's see here. So that's that. So yes, we'll talk about that. So, and I kind of skipped over this in class, right? So the first night, we're going to dive into each of the sections and try and work our way through it. And then each of the following nights, so like each of the sessions after this, we're going to get back into like a deep dive into each of the things that we kind of cover in the beginning, right? And now for a string, you can use double quotes and single quotes. And I will throw out a term for you right now that is called linting, like just like a lint roller or like lint on your clothes. You lint your code. And that is, if you use single quotes, you use single quotes every time. If you use double quotes, you use double quotes every time. And on something like this, Replit, I don't know if it was changing mine automatically or not. On save, no, it didn't. So, right, so like I've got double quotes, single quotes. It doesn't, where am I getting in there? Cause a little long pet name. So I changed it to my favorite pet name. Right, so this works. And it doesn't matter if it's in single or double quotes. When you're writing JavaScript, there is a, it's called Prettier. And like I have it built into my VS Code, and every project that I work on might be different. Like some projects everything may be double quotes, some projects may be single quotes, but you take your Prettier configuration, you save it into the root of your project, and then anyone that downloads your project that has Prettier installed in their IDE, their code will auto format to whatever you have set as your setting. So if someone comes along and you've been writing in single quotes and they start writing in double quotes, when they save the file, Prettier will go back and change all of the double quotes into single quotes. Now, in some languages like Ruby, like single quotes and double quotes can have different meanings. In JavaScript, it doesn't, but the backticks do, right? So let's string literal equal right? So notice how these are backticks. So this is the key at the top left of your keyboard by the tilde. And notice how I get 2 different colors in here, right? So all of my strings are brown. This is brown, but I put a $ and some curly braces, and this is white, right? And so if these were single quotes and I were to console.log this, right, I get exactly what's in the quotes. But if I turn this back to backticks, it becomes a string literal, and I can do inline string interpolation, which means that this is, instead of everything after a $ in the curly braces, it's looking for a variable or some code in here instead of it being part of the string. So it's going to actually refer back to the last name variable and give me the value of that. right? And that is a string literal with backticks. All right. And so that's that. So if you have an apostrophe, basically you either have to escape it, because notice how it's reading it as a single quote here and I'm breaking it up. So you can escape it with a backslash, right? So you see how it turns it pink. Or if you know that you're going to have an apostrophe, then you can use double quotes, right? Because now if I were to go back to doing this, like it would actually read it as an apostrophe. I mean, so if we wanted to make this possessive, boy, man, it is going crazy with the auto suggestion on this thing. All right, so now it's that, but also, so let's go ahead and take a look at that real quick. All right, so if I go back to my favorite pet name, right? So I get, this is how it should be, right? And if I turn this back to single quotes all the way around, notice how it gets white after the first one, right? So it's telling me unexpected identifier. So it's saying this is my string and it doesn't understand what's happening with the rest of this. This is just random text that's hanging on, causing an error. But if I do a backslash here, when this turns pink, this is called escaping the character, right? I'm back to working again. All right, and let's see. So that is it for variables. Plenty of questions in there. And again, every single challenge we do from here on out will include variables. So you're going to get lots of practice with them. All right, so data types. So the basics, numbers, like the number 34, strings. So we were just talking about this, double quotes, single quotes, backticks, right? Do the exact same thing. Also allow you to have a string, but it gives you a string literal that allows you to do string interpolation. And then we have Booleans, which is a fancy computer term for true or false. So it is either this or it is that. Undefined, so an undefined variable has been declared, but no value has been assigned to it yet. And null, which means there explicitly is no value. All right, so undefined and null are not the same thing. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of these here real quick. All right, so we've already covered strings. Excuse me, what they look like. So let's go ahead and take a look at a number. Right, so if I put a number here, again, we get a new color, right? So this isn't tan or brown, like the strings is green. So that's telling me it's a number. So that's telling me that that is not the same as this. This gets treated different, right? And same thing here now. So if I console.log my first number, just throw this up here. Oops, what did I do? My first number. Okay. Oh, spelling error. All right, so now notice now this is printed out in gold in the console. Right, so let string representation of number equal 18. And let's go ahead and console.log. Right, so 18 shows up in white up here. That is telling me that it's a string, right? This is gold. This is telling me it's a number. Now, same thing here. If I do let my first Boolean equal true. Notice how as soon as I get to true, it turns light blue. So true is a reserved word in JavaScript. And it's trying to give me an array now. And if we do console.log, my first Boolean, right, that shows up as gold over here as well. So the IDE, the replit environment is trying to help me out and help me keep things sorted, right? So this is a Boolean, it's not the string of true, because the same thing, if I say let string of true equal true, that, right? See, this is a string. This is the Boolean, this is a string, this is the actual number, right? And so this is just the IDE replit trying to help me out and keep things organized. Just like why all of these different colors just makes everything easier to read and read through the code, because same thing, like if I were to take something like this and just open up a blank document here, and it all becomes the same color, this becomes a lot harder to read than this, right? Like having these colors makes a world of difference. All right, and so undefined. So when we assign or when we declare a variable, we are also assigning it a value. So this is actually doing two steps right here. This is two steps. All of these are two steps. Right, so declaring a variable looks like this. Right, this variable has been declared. And we'll get rid of this. And if we console.log this now, we get undefined. And now I can say, I can assign it a value. Right, but if I run this, I still get undefined. And if I take my console.log and I move it down here, after I assign it a value, I now get the number 23. So this is actually shorthand for declaring the variable and then a second step of assigning it a value. And this is like, you will see variables get declared without assigned a value, but more likely than not, you will see this two-step process happen on the one line. Like this is, especially in the beginning, this is what you're going to run into most of the time. But if you don't assign it a value, it is undefined, which again is different than something that is explicitly null, which means basically undefined is there's nothing assigned to it yet. And when something is null, it is assigned the value of null, which is empty. All right, so we also have arrays. So this is another thing that we're going to talk about. And we're also going to talk about objects. Okay, so any questions on the basic types here before I take the next step? All right, so arrays. So now we're starting to get into data structures. This is a data type, is an array. And an array is something that holds multiple values inside. It can hold one value, but it's designed to hold multiples, right? So a string is just a string. I just have the one string here. That's what this is. This is a number, the Boolean. When we do an array, it is basically it is denoted by the square brackets. We also call it a box. And we put in a comma separated list of items that we want inside of our array, right? So I could do my cat names. So I could do Todd, Mo, Nugget, oops, and Nino, right? So those are my 4 cats. And now, if I want to look at my array, so if I'm going to send this to the console, now let me just comment out these. And you can comment out or uncomment multiple lines at a time. Right? So there is my array. And this is still a string, this is a string, this is a string, and this is a string. Right? And so this is an array of strings. There are 4 items in it. So it has a length of 4. And when we start using arrays, this is all strings. We can put numbers in here. We can put Booleans. We can mix things together. They can have different types of values. We can even put additional arrays in here, right? So I can put an array of their ages in here. Right, and so same thing, if I run this, now here is a string, a string, a string, and then an array, and inside of this array, my nested array is numbers, 15, 8, 5, and 3. All right, notice how even though these are strings are not white anymore, because we're inside an array, my IDE again is trying to help me out here, and it's saying your strings inside of an array, we're going to turn those orange. All right. And now when we use an array, we have different things, like we can access the different elements inside the array. We can also use pre-built functions or built-in methods on the array class that will tell us different things about our array or modify our array, right? So now I have, does anyone want to take a stab at what the length of my array is, my outer array? Don't worry about getting it right, getting it wrong. Should throw a number out there.
It's 3.
Why would you say 3?
Because your first index starts at 0.
You are correct. So when we count, and that is what I'm going to cover next, humans start counting at 1. Computers start counting at 0, but my length is absolute, right? So I think Pia threw it in there as 5, and that would be correct. So this is my 0 index, but there's still 5 items, 1, 2, 3, 4, and this whole thing is the 5th element in my outside array, even though this contains 4 elements inside of it, right? So then in my inside array, the length of this would be 4, right? But that was a very important point, Sean. And if you remember, computers start saving or start counting at 0, you're going to save yourself a lot of heartache when you're learning to code. So let's go ahead and do our first built-in method here, and we're going to call length on our array, right? And it gives me the number 5. So it is telling me that the length of my array is 5. Now, we can access the different elements in our array. And we can do that using what we call box notation or bracket notation. And so if I do 0, I'm going to get the first element in my array. And when I run it, the first element is Todd, right? So if I come out here, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So even though the length is 5, the last array element is 4. So if I go 4, I will get my entire inside array, right? And now if I just want the number 8 out of this, I can go a layer deeper, and it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3. So I want the number in the first index position, right? And if I put a 1 here, now when I console.log it, I just get the number 8. All right. And so that is how we access different things inside of an array. They're in a guaranteed order. They have a fixed index position. We can always move them, add things, subtract things, but they will, no matter how many times I run this, they will always appear in the same order inside an array. All right. And so, and remember, computers start counting at 0. And so if we want specific things out of our array, we need to access it by the index. Make this a little larger. Is that a little better? Okay, cool. And so all of these different things, so like pop will take the last element off an array, push will add an element to the end of the array, shift will take it off the front, unshift will add it to the front, index of will give us the index of something, and then slice and splice will allow us to modify the array or get partials of the array. But again, we aren't going to cover each of these tonight, but we will have, I think, night 3 or 4, we're going to go into all of these and do examples of all of the common built-ins for an array. All right, the other one I will do is index of. All right, so if I think that there's something inside an array, and this is easy because it's all visible on the screen, but let's say we had an array with 50,000 items in it, then it becomes a little bit harder to find things. So if I know that one of them is nugget, right? So I can say index of, right? It's giving me, it's returning 2, 0, 1, 2. So it gave me the index of the value nugget, right? And same thing if I said Todd, this should return 0, and it does. All right, and so let's go ahead and do this. Okay, any questions so far on arrays? And again, don't worry about it. Like, I mean, but one thing I'll say is if you have a question, there's at least a couple other people in the class that have the same question, so don't feel bad about throwing out lots of questions. Beyond that, like, this is the first time you may have seen this, but there's lots of challenges that are going to involve arrays, and we're going to have a whole night where we do a deep dive back into arrays here in a few days. Okay, so next is objects. So objects are a structure of data that can contain many values using a comma separated key value pairs. All right, so just like when we did an array, right? So we use let, we give it a name, we give it the square brackets, and then we fill it with elements that we want. An object, same kind of assignment structure, right? So we need a let to declare a variable, you give it a name, equals, and then instead of square brackets, we're going to use curly brackets. All right, and then instead of just putting elements in, we're going to use key value pairs, right? So key 1, value 1, key 2, value 2, and so on. And so this is, again, something you like as a web developer, arrays and objects are pretty much the name of the game, because what we're doing is retrieving information from databases. The backend server is getting the information from the database and then piping it to the front end using a basically something called JSON, which is JavaScript object notation, which is basically an agreed upon format for how to transfer data. And I can show you what that looks like here in a second. But let's go ahead and create an object. Right, so instead of a curly brace, we're going, or I'm sorry, instead of the square bracket, we're gonna use curly brackets. And I need to have key value pairs, right? So that's my name. We can say age. We can say many right? And so this is what an object looks like. We can, and let me do this. So we're hitting all of this. Oh, how do I work this? Sure, that looks good. All right. And so now I have created an object. There are several key value pairs in here. The keys are basically get treated as strings for JavaScript purposes. Even though there's no quotes around them, there's some magic going on the back end that treats these as strings. And so when I print it out over here, they'll show with quotation marks around them, even though we don't see them here, right? So I've got a string, got a number, I've got a string, I've got an array of strings, and then I've got a object with basically representing some siblings here. And each key value pair here is another object with a string and a Boolean as values, right? And so now if I console.log this object, I get the whole thing, right? And so we can see some color differences in here. Again, it's trying to help me out. Let me just comment these out for right now. All right, and just like in an array where we access elements via an index, in an object, we access the value by the key. All right, and so same thing here. If I do name, right, I just get my name. If I do pets, right, I get the whole thing. And now same thing here, if I do pets 0, so I'm going into my object, I'm finding the pets key, I'm then looking in the value, which is an array, and I'm returning the 0 index, so the first element of that array. Right, so I'm just digging deeper into my nested object. And it would be the same thing if I'm looking to do siblings. Oops, what did I do? Because I did pet still. That's my fault. All right, so there's siblings, and then I can dig down, like I just want to look at Bob. And I just want to know if Bob is older than me or not. Right, so I'm just stringing these things together to go down through the different layers of my data structure. All right, and like I said, as a web developer, this is what we do, right? Like we work with this quite a bit. And so like if I look at free API, Sure, cat facts, that sounds like it's down my alley. Go to cat facts. That's not what I'm looking for. There we go. All right, so this looks god awful and unreadable, right? But if we look up here, we see a curly brace. So I know I've got an object, and let me just make this bigger, right? So I've got an object right here. Count is a key. The value is 1427. There's entries, and then that's the key. And then the value is an array. I see my square bracket. So the first element in my array is basically all of this information, right? And there's my comma. So all of this information is the first element in my array. It's another object with key value pairs inside it. And so all of this, like this is what JSON looks like, right? Like this is the stuff that we're learning. And I thought I had a JSON Chrome extension here. Right? So this looks a lot easier to read. And so this is how, like, that is what the computer sends. It doesn't care about spacing, syntax, color, anything like that. It is just blowing huge chunks of data across the internet between servers. For humans, to make it human readable, like I said, I've got a Chrome extension. This, though, looks just like this, right? Like a little bit different color scheme, right? But we're doing the exact same thing here, right? And so when it doesn't matter what type of software you work on, like you are grabbing data that looks like this, and then you are sending it somewhere so that it can be either presented into a user interface or parsed by a printer to print things out in a specific format, right? But like this is the data that we work with on the backside that we as developers learn to read. All right, and so all it is just a never-ending list of, right? So there's my object. So there's 2 items in my object. There's my array. There's 1400 items in my array, right? And each one of these is just another object in the array. So at the end of the day, I've got an object with 2 key value pairs. The first one is the count, and the second one is an array of 1427 objects, right? That represent different APIs. All right. And so let's see here. So objects also have a bunch of built-ins on them. There will be a whole night where we cover those as well. It is 8 p.m. So does anyone have any questions on anything that we've covered up until this point? Okay, so I'm going to pause the recording. All right, welcome back from the break. Monday, October 9th, 8:10 p.m. Central Time. We're in the home stretch for the first evening. I know I've been talking a ton and throwing a ton at you, so I appreciate everyone sticking with me and asking all the questions in the chat. So one of the questions that got brought up was basically referencing a different way to access things inside of an object. And this is, like I said, we're using box notation or bracket notation, some people may call it. You also have the ability to use what is called dot notation. All right. And so we can also do console.log instructor. And instead of using the square brackets, we can do something like this, right? So this is pre-filling it for me, right? And we get to true. So we went to instructor.siblings.jeff.older, and we got the value of true, right? Instead of using the bracket notation. Now, there is a oddity within the names that you can use dot notation if you want to, but there are certain things that will cause it not to work correctly. And let me show you why I usually teach bracket notation for people that are just getting started out. All right, so if I do console.log instructor, comment that out for a second. Come on, spit it out. There we go. Right. So we've got all of our information here. Now, if I were to write this in just kind of like standard format, right? So I could convert this to, well, instead of breaking it apart, just call it full name. All right. And so now I can do instructor dot full name, if I can type it. And there it is. All right. Now that is how I usually generate my keys. Now, this is also a perfectly valid key name, or if you want your keys to be in a more readable format. All right. And now I can't do anything about that. Notice how this turned white when I hit the space in there. It's going to get all sorts of angry at me. Right. So missing after this is expecting a curly brace. It has no idea what to do with that name. However, if we do bracket notation, I can still get to it. Right. And that's why I usually, as an introductory, like I will teach you, even if everything is formatted correctly, to do it this way instead of this way. These are both valid ways, but if you ever get any like true strings with spaces in them or something weird in them in the key name, the dot notation stops working. Now, when we deal with like the JavaScript object notation, stuff like that, you'll always see it this way. But it's just like an extra wrinkle that can throw people off when they're first getting started up. So when you're creating your objects, I highly recommend that you write them in camel case, all as one word with no spaces in it. That way you can access it either way. But just know, like if you're running into something weird, remember, like this can be a string with spaces in it if you put quotes around it, and you will then no longer be able to access it using dot notation. Any questions about that? All right, moving along. Operators. So in math, we're used to the equal sign being equal, right? Like equality. but in JavaScript and a lot of other programming language, it's the assignment operator. So you'll use this constantly. It's for assigning a value to a variable. And it is for assigning a value to a variable, and is easily confused with comparison operators, double equal or triple equal. But this is like if you're trying to figure out if two values are equal, in JavaScript, you use these. You only use this when you are assigning a value to a variable. So you can follow along with your own replit if you want to type these in. You can take notes on a piece of paper, however you want to do it. But again, at the end of the night, I will provide you with the link to this and you'll have full access to it. And you can make a copy of it if you want to. There'll be a little, well, here I can show you real quick. Do Google Drive 10.3. All right, so this is the list of challenges. So I don't own these challenges. These are all owned by CP admin. So when I give you the link to this, to my notes tonight, you will get a screen that looks like this, and there will be a button at the top right that says fork. And when you click that fork button, you are making an identical copy of it and you are saving it to your Replit account. If you have not created a Replit account yet, you just need to go to replit.com and open up a free account with them. And I'll drop this in. All right, so that was part of the sign up instructions, but if you haven't gotten to it yet, not a big deal. You can create a free account there. And then once I start giving you solutions to challenges, you'll be working on the challenges yourself as well. You will like have your copy, but you'll be able to access my challenges, make copies of them. Once you make a copy of them, you can edit them and change whatever you want to in them. Everything we do in class that I do on the screen will be available to you at the end of each night. So don't sweat trying to keep up with me while you're listening. Like if you're falling behind trying to type things, like learn however you learn best, but like don't miss out on what I'm saying because like you're trying to struggle with an error on your Replit. Okay, and let's see. So all right, so assignment operator, right? So equal, we've already been using it tonight in the examples. So all these other ones are pretty self-explanatory. They do exactly what you think they would do, right? So the plus sign is addition, subtraction is the minus sign, multiplication is the asterisk. This one's a little different, right? So usually we would use like the tent key or like the shift 6 to get the little tent operator, right? This guy, and in JavaScript, it's just 2 asterisks to exponents. So, right, 3 double asterisk 2 is 3 to the second power. So 3 times 3, 9. Division is the same. This is also a little different. This gets called the modulus a lot, but in JavaScript, it's the remainder, which is very similar to the modulus, but it basically returns the remainder. So if you do 10, and this is the shift 5, the little percentage symbol, this is saying 10 remainder 3. So 10 divided by 3, and whole numbers, 3 goes into it 3 times, gives me 9 with the remainder of 1 left over. Right, so if I did 10 remainder 2, this would be 0 because 2 goes into 5, 2 goes into 10 5 times with nothing left over. And if I did 4, this would return 2, right? Because 4 goes into 10 twice, which is 8, and that means that there's a remainder of 2 left over. All right, so this is where things get a little bit more interesting, where we'll see some things that maybe we haven't seen before. These 4 you've probably seen before. These are going to be a little bit different. All right, so in JavaScript and in a lot of languages, they have equal and strictly equal. All right, so two equal signs is equal, three equal signs is strict equal. To avoid heartache, always start with strict equal. Every time you're trying to solve a challenge, you should be able to solve it with strict equal. And let me show you what happens here as kind of like an oddity of JavaScript. All right. So if I say let A equal 17 and let B equal 18. All right. So console.log A double equals B. Right? False. 17 is not equal to 18. All right. So let's change B to 17. This is true. So this is the number 17 and the number 17, they are equal to each other. What happens when I turn 17 into a string? Does anyone want to take a guess here? What might happen? True or false? True. Do you know why we would get true? Yep, because it doesn't check the type, right? So what this is saying is the number 17 is equal to the string 17, right? And so this is, and Kim is right, is because it does not check the type, right? This is a number, this is a string. It doesn't care. It's still going to tell you true because it's the same value. Right, but if we put strict equals in here, now we get false. And why I say we will always start with strict equals is because this is less restrictive and you could end up with bad data that would give you a false positive, which we don't want, right? So if we turn this back into here and then we do this, right, now we get true again, right? Because now both the value and the type of the value are strictly equal to each other. All right. Next is the not equal or strict not equal. So this is basically the opposite of this, right? And again, we would always want to start with strictly not equal. So the exclamation point in JavaScript is referred to as a bang operator. So like a gun goes bang, B-A-N-G. And so this would be bang equals equals, right? Is how you would say this line of code, which is strictly not equal. And so with something like that, I'm not sure what you mean by open the Python template. Oh, no, if you are back in Replit trying to create one, it's going to be node is the template that you're looking to open up. Right, so when you create a new Replit, you'll create the REPL, and then you'll get different templates, and so see the little JS symbol, that is node. Node is what powers JavaScript. You want this to be bigger? Okay, so this is probably about as big as I can make it before it's going to get difficult to read space wise. So, well, hopefully this will work. All right. So if we are looking, and this is here's just kind of like another tip while you're starting out, and this is whether you're starting out or you've been a developer for 20 years. If you can solve the problem using equals versus using the inverse of equals, try to solve it that way, right? Because this is going to get a little bit more difficult to wrap your head around, right? Because we're saying A is not equal to B, we run it and we get the value of true, right? And so now we're dealing with a kind of like something with a negative polarity and something with a positive polarity, versus like if we can say, are these two things equal? And that is true if they are, false if they're not. That is generally less mentally taxing while you're trying to solve coding problems. And that's usually like some feedback that will be given to junior developers is like, hey, and there will be situations where you have to use this, but there's a lot of situations where the first thought is to solve it with a not equals, but there may be a better way to solve it using equals. Yes, this is an exclamation point. That's, again, it's called a bang operator. Yes, this is recorded. It'll get uploaded to YouTube, and then you'll have permanent access to it as long as the Code Platoon YouTube channel remains in existence. All right, and then there's greater than and less than, and then greater or equal or less than or equal. All right, and so I know we in math, like we write it as like a line underneath it, but there isn't that character available. So it's just either the greater than or less than followed by the equal to get the that effect. All right. Now, this is, again, probably something new unless you've had previous programming experience or taken a logic class before. But we also will be working with logical and or in this class. All right, and let's go ahead and take a look at this. So, and when we have and, we're saying that both the things that we're evaluating, so the thing on the left and the thing on the right, both have to be true for it to resolve to true, right? So A is 4 and B is 2 and C is 8. So if we just take a look at this real quick, so if we say is 4 greater than 2 and is 2 less than 8, right? So this is true and this is true, so it resolves to true, right? And so now down here, we can say is 4 greater than 8. This is now false. And then we can say is 4 greater than 2. And this remains true, but because this is false, the whole thing resolves to false. All right. And so that is a logical and operator. Both things have to be true for it to resolve to true. Or is kind of the opposite of that, right? So A is greater than B, so 4 is greater than 2, that is true. Or B is less than C, so is 2 less than 8, that is true. So they're both true. But when we come down here, 4 is greater than 8, this is false. But A is greater than B, that is still true. So we're saying if this is true or if this is true, return true. And because this side of the comparison is true, the whole thing resolves to true. All right. Any questions specific to this? Okay. Deborah, if you can't see your console, at the top of the right-hand side where you get the plus, just click on the plus and then start typing in console. and you'll find the console is one of the available tabs that you can switch to, and if you click on it, it'll open it up. Okay. No problem. All right. So functions. So what are functions? Functions are reusable blocks of code that perform a specific set of instructions that you can define, or that you defined, or that are built into the language, right? So all of the functions we have used so far have been built in, right? We used dot length on our array. We used index of on our array. Those were built-in functions or built-in methods that are already included inside the language for us. Right? I didn't have to write any new code for it. Functions can be, and we're going to build our own functions. That's pretty much the point of this class, is all of the solutions that we write will be in a reusable function for the rest of class. Functions can be defined to accept 0 or more inputs, or what we refer to as parameters, and in most cases output a return value. To declare a new function, use the function keyword followed by the name of the function. When a return statement is encountered, the function exits immediately, returning the return value. Okay, so let's go ahead, and again, this becomes, like I said, like a bunch of word salad again. So let's pull these over into the notes here real quick, and let's write our first function. All right, so a function is a reusable block of code that performs a specific set of instructions that you define, right? So then, like, it's already trying to, I'll just, oops, hit the tab. Okay, so it gives me one. All right, so I've got my function here, right? So instead of doing like a let or a const or a var, I write function. I give it a space, and then I have to name my function, right? So we're going to declare it, and then give it a name, and then give it any parameters. Okay, so this function is called add two numbers. We've got num1, num2. Let's console log this out here real quick. Now, having a function declared doesn't do anything, right? So if I hit run, nothing happens. So I have to call my function with a function call, right? And to do a function call, I have to type out the name of the function, and then I have to give it the parentheses, right? And it's suggesting two numbers for me here, 17 and 18. So when I hit run, who wants to take a guess what's going to happen?
It will add the numbers.
Okay, and so what will we see over here? Okay, Bianca got it, nothing. Why won't we see anything over here, Bianca? Yep, so we have to console.log it. So running this function, if I hit run, it added 17 and 18 together and it returned 35. But I did not send it to my console, right? And so I have to wrap my function call inside a console.log, right? Otherwise I won't see it. So there's my 35. So a bit of a trick question. And the reason I do it that way is because I want everyone to think about this, because it's the same thing where I see people try and solve things, and this is technically wrong. Like if you do this on the application, you won't get any credit, right? So I can do console.log num1 plus num2, right? And I will see 35 over here. But this is just sending it to the console, and I'm not returning anything anymore, right? So if I console.log down here, I get undefined. And that is because a function that doesn't return anything is undefined. It doesn't have any type of value to it. So all we're doing is taking the two numbers, adding them together and sending them to the console and then continuing on with our life. Nothing else happens here. And that's not what we want. We want our functions to return information for us to be able to access or save for a later time, right? So now if we do it, now I'm back to getting 35 over here. And also, right, so we're good. Now, with this function, some people may have been thrown for a loop, right? You see num1, num2 over here. These are parameters. They're basically variables that we are declaring inside the local scope of the function, right? Num1, num2 only exist between line 63 and line 65. If I try and console.log num1, I'm going to get yelled at, right? So num1 is not defined at line 66, right? It's telling me I have no idea what num1 is. And that is because I am outside of the function. Now, if I throw num1 right here, what am I going to see? Another trick question. So we will not see 17. We will not see the value of num1. The reason being is that we have a return right here, right? When a return statement is encountered, the function exits immediately, returning the return value. So normally, let me refresh this real quick and see if it lights it up. And it's still not doing it. Normally this would be grayed out and I would get a little message telling me that this is unreachable code. Anything after the return never happens. It doesn't matter. Like if I just put like a ton of different things down here, there it goes. Console.log unreachable code detected, because once we hit a return, that is the last thing this function will ever do. And so basically anything after the return is considered unreachable. So let's go do this. All right, but now if I take it and I put it up here before the return, now I should see 17 and 35. All right. And so what's nice about this, and again, we're doing something very simplistic here where I'm adding two numbers together, right? So it could be just as easy to say let x equal 17 plus 18 and console.log x, right? And there's the 35 from that. And then I could say let y equal 20 plus 20, right? And because this is a pretty simple function. And so there's actually, it's harder to write this than it is to write this. But what's nice about doing this in the function, and again, where we start getting into more complicated things where there's more to the code to it, this becomes reusable, right? So I don't have to keep assigning different variables. I don't have to rewrite the function. I can use this over and over again as many times as I'd like to basically keep adding two numbers together, right? And all functions are reusable. So we can keep using copy paste them. I can add in different combinations, whatever I want to do with it. And it's just using the same chunk of code over and over again. All right. Any questions so far on what I've covered with functions? All right. So again, right, we use function, we name our function, we give it parameters. Remember, it can be 0. So I can also write a function, right? So function hello world. Right, and now I have no parameters yet, right? So I don't have to give it anything. I can just console out logging. Let's go ahead and turn that into a return just so we can keep everything consistent. And we'll console.log hello world. Right, and we run it, and there's hello world. Right, and I can use this. Well, what did I do there? Mashing buttons. All right. I'm gonna use it over and over and over again. Right? Hello world, hello world, hello world. And now if I wanted to make this a little bit more customizable, I could do something like this, where I say name, right? And then put parameter up here in my function call. So there's that. And now if I run this, I'll get an error message. Oh, no, it'll just tell me undefined. Because I never just like assign the parameter name a value. So I can say Charles, I can say Jeff, I can say Bob. The note, same thing here, single quotes, double quotes won't make a difference. Right now I get hello world Charles, Jeff, Bob. Let's go ahead and do that. Right. So there we go. And so it can have 0, 1, 2. If you start getting into a function where you've got more than 4 parameters that you're giving it, then it's time to start thinking about ways to maybe simplify the function. Let's see here. What if we turn up above the return? Does it give output the console.log? Yeah, so moving, so when we do this, right, so I can say line 64. Right, so that's the value on line 64, right? Like there's my console.log. So that's getting spit out, and then we're returning, and then we're not seeing it a second time. All right. So again, declaration, we name it, any parameters that we need. And then parameters again are basically just variables that we're declaring within the local scope of our function. So they only param1 and param2 only exist between these curly braces for the function. If I try and access them outside of that, we'll run into issues, right? And so we've got that. All right. So here's a little twist. I will so an anonymous function is basically I wouldn't concern yourself with an anonymous function at this point in your learning. They will cover it more in Code Platoon, but you will run into that you don't have to name your function. It just helps for calling it. This will, like, you're assigning it to a variable. Again, don't confuse yourself with the anonymous function right now. A fat arrow function is the ES6 version of writing a function. So the ECMAScript 5 and 6, these are basically different major syntactical versions of JavaScript, right? And like ES6 has been around since 2015. So you will still see functions written this way. A lot of these challenges that we have are written this way. But you can do the exact same thing with a fat arrow function, right? And they do the exact same thing. So I've got add two numbers up here as a function. And so I can say let fat add two numbers equals let's say num1, num2, and then fat arrow, and then that, right? And then return num1 plus num2, and same thing here. So can then do fat add two numbers. And let me get rid of some of this noise here real quick, and also take this out. Now let's run it, right? And so 17 plus 18, I get my 35, and add two numbers, right? And so I get that. They do the exact same thing, they're just written a little bit different syntax. Now, again, a little bit of a wrinkle here with fat arrow functions. So if you have 0 or 2 plus parameters, you need to have them in parens. Right, so basically these are your parens. So see how we've got num1, num2, but for whatever reason, if you are doing just one parameter, and just made this fix, you do not need to wrap them in parens. Right, so this still works. Num1 is 17 plus 5 is 22, but if you didn't have anything here, like you still have to have the parens. So if we were just returning 5 plus 5 every time, like this works. And that's just a small wrinkle in the syntax there. All right, but again, fat arrow function, ECMA 6, standard old school function, ECMA 5, they both do the exact same thing, they just look a little bit different. Any questions on the difference between these two formats for the functions? Okay. All right, so control flow. And this will be, I'm pretty sure this is the last, okay, this will be the last section for tonight. We've got about 12 minutes left in class. So I will cover control flow, the starting of conditional logic, and then we'll also pick back up on Wednesday with this and do a, we'll recover all of this. And then we've got iteration and built-in methods and then problem solving suite. So we made it pretty far tonight. Okay, control flow or conditional logic. When you want to control how a computer goes through your program, use control flow. So this evaluates either true or false Boolean values and allows us to select different outcomes to select a different outcome depending on user input or the result of a computation. All right. So the core of this is an if statement. Right. And then the next step is an if else statement. And then lastly is an else if statement. All right. And so let's go ahead and take a look at these. So let me console, go ahead and comment those out. All right, so we've got a blank slate here. All right, so conditional logic. All right, so if I say x is equal to 10, I think I've got another x up here. Maybe I don't. Let's run. We'll either get an error or we won't. We didn't get an error. Cool. So here is our conditional if statement. X is, we'll just take the suggestion is greater than 5. Console.log x is greater than 5. Well, let's go ahead and do it. right? And so now if we run this, oops, there we go. So 10 is greater than 5, right? Now if I say 50, nothing happens, right? So it's ran, don't have to push stop anymore, went through, it never went in here and looked at this line of code because this evaluated to false. And so we skip over it. If it evaluates to true, we take a look at what is inside it, right? So now an else statement will catch, this will now execute when something is false, right? So we can say is less than or equal to 50, right? So now when I run this, it's either going to say X is greater than 50 or it's going to say X is less than or equal to 50. Right, so 10 is less than or equal to 50. Okay, now an if else statement is, or an else if statement is where we want to be able to have additional conditional checks. And you can have a dozen of these, a million of these if you want to. But again, if you start ending up with like a never-ending list of them, then we start to look at maybe there's a better way to solve the problem. Okay, so I need to do else if, and we'll say X is triple equal to 50, then we'll say X is equal to 50, else all right, so if we run this, we should get 10 is less than 50. If we change this to 50, right, 50 is equal to 50. And if we turn it to 51, right, 51 is greater than 50. And now we have to be careful here because if we do something like this is greater than or equal to 50, right? So when I run this, I will get 51 is greater than 50. Now, if I change this back to 50, it is going to tell me this again, because it is going to find the first thing that is true, and it is going to stop there. Right? 50 is greater than 50, and which is wrong, but it's because I put the wrong symbol in here. So whenever we're doing an if-else statement, you have to be careful how you order your statements. Usually you want the most restrictive statements first, and then you get more and more broad, with your else statement being the general catch-all that catches everything that doesn't fall into any of the other scenarios. Because if you have something that's broader first, you'll never get to your more specific criteria, even if it meets that criteria, right? It doesn't look for the truest one. It finds the first one that's true, and then it pieces out of the if statement. I'm done. This is true. I don't even look at the rest of these, right? And so we change this back, then we'll be back to working order again. Right, so. All right. So that is it for control flow. Any questions on control flow or anything else that we've covered so far tonight? It's 8:55. We've got 5 minutes left of class.
Okay, I might have a question. So if you have a bunch of else if statements, you don't have to have an else statement, right? Like at the end.
You don't have to.
Yeah.
No. But you may want one. It just depends on if you want something to happen with everything that doesn't meet the previous criteria, or if you want nothing to happen, right? Because if I don't have this else statement, basically this will only give me output when I'm greater than 50 or equal to 50. And then if I don't care if it's less than 50, I can get rid of this else statement and then it just won't do anything every time it's less than 50. So that it just depends on the scenario if you want that else statement or not.
Okay, thanks.
Right, and if I were to write a function where I only needed to look for one thing, like let's say I've got a function that's reading a stream of numbers and I only needed to do something if the number is a prime number, then I would just write basically if whatever formula I used to identify a prime number, do this, and then I would never even write an else statement because it would just ignore all of the other numbers because I don't need it. But if I need to do something with all of those non-prime numbers as well, that's where my catch-all else statement comes in. All right, so it just depends on the scenario. Any other questions on anything we've covered so far tonight? Going once, going twice. All right, I'm going to turn off the recording here.